Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Portland, Maine. You can see I'm here with my whiteboard, Russ from the Towelhurst End podcast here. And I just wanted to kind of go into some interesting mailbag questions. There were some really good tactical pieces this week and a few things that I've been wanting to touch on anyway. So I thought this would be a good little summary. I've got my tactics board here. We're gonna dive in a little bit and we'll see what happens. Let's start off by talking about Lewis Wing. We got a really good question. Obviously, Lewis Wing this season moved in the build-up phase from right back to sort of more of a CDM six kind of position. And the question is whether that's working more than last season or not. Let's kind of first take a look at what's going on. Now, like I spoke about last week, there have been times this season when we've seen in build-up this player wing right here coming all the way deep, splitting those center backs, and then you get that inverted right back from Craig, sometimes from Abrafa, Dorset, Garcia. We've seen lots of different players this season with that, and you get this sort of it's kind of dynamic in the way that wing moves, but it's almost like a 3-2. What I'm actually seeing more in the last few weeks, though, and I think this has been part of a concerted effort to get wing a little bit further up the field, is you're still getting this sort of split from, so this would be Mbenge here and then Bindon over here. But then the goalkeeper, Button, is better with his feet than Pereira is. Other issues with Button, but he is better with his feet. This is something that I think he was brought in for in the first place. So where does Lewis Wing go? Well, Lewis Wing, Michael Craig will actually step up into a more right back sort of position there. The left back can also go a little bit wider. And then Wing is often sitting kind of in the middle of all of that. So it's almost like a 2-3 build up structure. But there are times when I've seen it, the goalkeeper stepping so far forward as to make it almost a 3-3 build up structure. 2-3, 3-3, it doesn't really matter. Why are Reading doing that? It creates so many triangles, right? So you've got here, right here, and build up. You've got right here and build up. Lots of ways to solve issues, right? What are those issues? So for most teams when they're coming in, it's difficult to see with the white, bear with me. But what you can kind of see here is that there is a standard 4-4-1-1 kind of on here. A lot of teams sort of look like this out of position. Sometimes you'll see more of a 4-4-2 or even like a 4-2-4, especially if the team is pushing high. So let's put them, into a 4-2-4 scenario. So we'll bring forward here the wingers for the other team, and we'll have one striker going over here. Now, I think that most teams, when they're game planning to work within an opposition build-up, they're deciding that they're okay with one particular player having the ball. It's quite difficult to know who that is in the Reading backline. Tyler Bindon, obviously very good with his feet. And Benge, not quite as good with his passing, but he is pretty good at getting the ball forward long, and he's also good at progressing the ball with his legs by running. Which is something that he can use to burn any striker who might overcommit. If they overcommit with Mbenge looking this way, across the box, for instance, and try and cross that off, and Mbenge could drive into this space, and now that's two players who are out of the play, who are behind the ball, as these players kind of go here. But if these players are smarter, so let's maybe say that this lane gets blocked up here, this striker moves forward to kind of hold on to Mbenge, stand in the lane here, and this player goes forward to get with Bindon. How do we get around this? Well, that's kind of with that free movement of Wing, right? So we can see him move wherever he needs behind these players here. And of course, these players, the center mids, if they're really committing to a high press, the opposition, they might step up and make that even more difficult. But as we heard Ruben talk about, the job in that sense is often to get Ben Elliott free in the end zone. So whenever you're pressing, you're basically taking a risk and saying, we're leaving some space free. So if Wing comes forward to kind of make a dynamic play to break this press, then he can either turn and drive or play a ball, or he can play that ball directly to Ben Elliott. And then overall, Ben Elliott is going to be able to get that ball, drive into all of this space that is now vacated. So even if he's not got, like an overload, even if it's just a 4v4 or a 4v6, he's still got a lot of space to drive into. So do I think that Wing is as effective? Let's just move him back here in this sort of CDM build-up, in this sort of 2-3 build-up as he was last year going out to the right. I don't know if he himself is quite as productive, as it were, but I would say that this helps the team a little bit more. Obviously, at right back, we've got Craig, who can kind of do some of these, things that Wing was doing last season anyway. And then Ben Elliott is a better player than Reading had available, than others last year. So keeping Ben Elliott in the team, keeping him in this position, sort of up here in the right half space, just into the opposition's half, I think this is working for Reading. And so that's why Wing's there. I do think it's on the coaching staff's mind to try and find ways to get Wing a little bit further forward. We saw him got the assist for Sam Smith's goal in the game against Burton just now. But yeah, I definitely think that there are times when the coaching staff are still going to be looking for Wing to be further forward. In a 4-3-3 shape, if you're using this 2-3 build-up, and again, you can kind of see 4-3-3, by the way, in this, right? It's just a little bit different to how you would necessarily build out a 4-3-3 if you were building on FIFA or whatever. But formations, for the most part, are out of possession formations, and teams do all kinds of weird stuff when they are in possession. But this is still a 4-3-3. You can see the players here. It's relatively simple how all of this comes together. And the one thing I think is actually really interesting about all of it is that lower position of Sam Smith this season, I think that's a little bit linked to where Wing is playing centrally, because we get this sort of nice box, almost like a box, more like a diamond midfield at times when we're on possession of the ball. We really want our, the fullbacks actually in the last few weeks and the wingers to be super wide. The wingers have been really, really wide in the last few weeks. And I think that's partly to do with facing back fours, but it's definitely worth taking a look at with that. We had a really nice kind of goal this week that Campbell scored, where he was able to nick the ball away from an opposition player right on the outside of the box, and then just basically take two strides and get a shot off and score. But as we saw that play develop, we saw Mbenge driving out of defense. Again, someone's trying to press him the wrong way. He's able to run around them. And Mbenge is able to play this ball forward for Campbell. At this time, again, facing a back four. Sam Smith had these guys so narrow here. But then our eights, Elliott and Nibs, so narrow as well. But Campbell, Kelvin really, really out wide. Kelvin in particular, this is a little bit surprising for me. I've seen him as more of a half-space winger so far this year. But just really, really interesting how that all comes together. So very narrow. And this seems to be how Reading are trying to attack a back four right now. They're trying to open up these spaces right here, right? Sam Smith's been best this season when he's making runs into the near post. We saw another run last night into the near post for Wing's header that kind of got him across the box. Goal into the back of the net there. Very nice. But yeah, kind of interesting how the team is looking to do that, keeping those eights high and narrow, looking to drive into these spaces. And as we've seen in the last few weeks and months, Elliott and Nibs have goals. They are getting chances to shoot. And I think it's because Reading are looking to exploit space in between the fullback and the two center backs in the middle, using a kind of narrow structure in the midfield. Let's talk about Reading's new signing, Campbell. Now, there have been some kind of umming and ahhing about his performances so far, how he was playing, whether he was really an upgrade on Akande, the young player who had been playing in that position before him. So I want to talk a little bit about Campbell today. I want to start off by kind of mentioning, he had two really good chances to score, one in his first game, and I think the other in his second game this season. And I think that if either of those goals go in, and then we have the performance against Burton as well, we'd be having a pretty different conversation about Chem and talking about how it's a good little piece of recruitment given Reading's current scenario. But let's have a talk about him and what he's doing. So Campbell obviously played in League One quite a lot of minutes last year. I'm going to call this Campbell right here at the moment. This is the Chem zone over up here, okay? And I think the way that he's played so far, while not perfect, has kind of shown exactly why he was brought in, and it makes me think that Sellers was involved in bringing him in, basically. So in each game, the eye test has kind of shown me that Chem is capable as a pressing forward, and he is capable of winning the ball. And that's actually shown if you look at his statistics for duels, for tackles, not just versus Akande, but versus Femi Aziz as well. So Reading at the moment are actually getting more in terms of a pressing performance out of Chem Campbell than they were out of Femi last season or out of Akande this season. So let's break down very quickly because I don't think it needs to be hammered too long. Akande is a good player. I'm excited to see how he develops for Reading because I think he could really be useful, especially even in the back half of this season. But I do think that for the time being, Chem Campbell is going to start there because statistically, he's getting involved in more duels. He's winning far more of his duels by percentage. He gets off a little bit more in terms of shots per game. He is weaker in terms of delivering crosses. He seems to be very shy to cross the ball with Chem. I think that's probably one of the few things that I would hold against him. There have been times when a cross has been available and he hasn't quite dug the ball out of his feet quick enough. But I think that he's giving us something, from a pressing sense right now. He's certainly giving us more than Kelvin was on the other side. And he is giving us more in that sense in terms of tackles per game and tackles high up the field than Femi Aziz was. One of the other questions that we got was whether he's tracking back enough. And I thought that was interesting too. So obviously with him like this, let's put everyone back into their defensive roles. So obviously your fullbacks come back and these guys drop in here to help defend. And then these guys are coming back. So obviously, typically this role, in that sort of like right wing thing, if you're tracking back, your role is going to be, put some pressure on this player here, make sure that he doesn't have free reign to just make passes. If that fullback is coming up as well, he needs to be, aware of where he's coming from. But generally, we're not going to see him that much further back than here. Or maybe, a little bit more inside if that's what the manager wants. And I will say that so far, if we look at their heat maps, Chem is not, I would say, coming back quite as far as Femi Aziz was last season. But he is actually coming back more than Akande was. He's coming back much further. I think it's worth putting in the caveat that Akande is obviously facing some weird game states because he's coming in as a substitute. But at the same time, Chem at the moment seems to be more capable of covering that ground, going all the way up the field and then coming pretty deep as well, kind of getting towards, our defensive third over here. But yeah, he's certainly staying up there. One other thing that's quite interesting that I've seen from Campbell so far, no interest whatsoever in this space. And I think that is kind of linked to the lack of crosses so far. It doesn't seem that, trying to get a cross off to somebody crashing the box is really Chem's style. I've noticed, though, that he is staying very, very wide, and even more so than Femi would. So sometimes, if we're starting here, you'll see Chem come all the way out here wide. And then once he reaches the box, he'll drive in and he'll try and make a play from there. Something that we instead kind of saw from Femi a lot last season was more of a diagonal drive, towards the box. Or if he was starting kind of a bit close to the box, a bit far away. But he would kind of make more diagonal drives. And we see this in the heat maps. You actually see a lot more of Femi coming into this space. And again, into this space up here. So Femi really wasn't as interested in this kind of area coming into the box as Chem has been so far. Much more interested in up here, trying to get cutbacks, or coming in here, trying to shoot on that left foot of his. But yeah, I think that Chem has shown us that he does have a good shot on him. It took the goalkeeper, I think it was for Charlton, to make a very good save to stop that from going in the net. So yeah, I think that overall, I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do this season. If he can continue to score goals, then that's all we need. I just don't think that he's going to score, the kinds of exciting goals that Femi scored. I think he's a bit more of a Harvey Nibbs right winger, if that makes sense. He's Nibbsy. Let's go with that. So to be honest with you, I'm quite excited about Chem. I think we saw some flashes in the first games, and you always want your players to finish, right? So that's kind of why it's frustrating when he wasn't doing that. But he is still approaching the box in interesting spaces. And he's able to help us keep this formation. So I was saying, he's coming down wide, and especially against back fours, that's working out quite nicely. It's helping us to stretch the field and find space for other players. So, going all the way back to that first question about Wing tonight and whether it's better for him to play center or central midfield than right back. I don't know if it's better individually for the player in terms of his numbers and in terms of how much he enjoys playing the game of football. But I do think it's working a little bit better for Reading. I think that while there were times last season when the old structure was working better than the structure that we're using now is working, generally we're making some progression with it. And I can really see us kicking on, which gets us to the last question. With the ownership things going on, what can Reading really expect this season? Obviously, I was pretty bullish at the start of the season. I was pretty sure that Reading could challenge for the playoffs and maybe even for a promotion this season. I think that's going to be really tough given everything that's going on. And it's just so hard to predict what's even going to happen between now and December, let alone any other time. But I think that if Reading continue to improve in this style, if we get maybe our right back, and Craig is able to help out in the middle more, or maybe not, maybe he stays at right back. I don't know. I think this is working okay at the moment. Then, maybe there are more ways to progress. But at the moment, I'm really very, very impressed with how much Ruben has been able to get out of this squad and this situation. So what can we expect for Reading this year? I still think that challenging for the playoffs is possible. I'm not super convinced by this league. Huddersfield were excellent, for a month and then completely fell to pieces in the last few games. And their fans are really having issues now. So tough to say exactly. I think that if Reading can hold on, though, and just about be there or thereabouts, be within the top 12 come January, then Reading have got a really good chance of pushing for the playoffs, depending on the ownership situation, of course. So let's see where that ends up. If you've got any other tactical questions, I've got a whiteboard. So, hit me up, send them over my way. I would love to break things down. We've got shorts coming this year. We've got all kinds of fun breakdown videos, podcasts, live streams. Get involved with the Tilehurst End. If you guys were wondering what the noises were, my dog was in the office with me today. So he was quietly mewing along to the Reading information there. All right, everybody say bye-bye, Tonka. Last quick thing on Campbell. There was some debate, kind of in the weeks before, I think Huddersfield, about whether he was lazy or not perhaps running as much as maybe Akande would or another player in his stead would. I don't buy that personally. And the reason I say that is that I haven't seen sort of how far has he run stats, because quite frankly, I don't think those are particularly interesting. I don't think they're that useful. I think what is useful is looking at their duels and how many duels they get involved in. A lot of looking at duel stats are kind of looking at them from the perspective of how many did they win, and that kind of shows you, the physical commitment and their physical ability to win the ball when there is somebody else right there with them 1v1. It's something we work on all the time with academy teams. It is receiving that ball 1v1 or fighting for that ball 1v1. But also just the pure number of duels that you get into. I think that's an indication of useful running, as it were. A little bit of that theory in my head has been formed by Nibs and watching him. And that's why I say that Chem is kind of a Nibsy player, because he has been consistently in the last few games now in the top 3 or 4 players on the team for duels. He's getting involved in a lot of duels, more than Hib Hashiman on the other side for sure. Not usually more than Smith, but he's not asked to compete for the ball quite as much as Smith is. So I think that's part of what's going on there. Nibs still has games where he's just unplayable in that regard. Nobody can get up to his level. And importantly, Chem Campbell's dual success numbers are a little bit better than Femi's last year and much better than Akande's so far. And so I think that's mostly what's keeping Akande out of the team, is that Chem has just learned how to use his body to win a few more duels per game. And as Slot talked about at the start of the season, you can plan as much as you like. You can be as good a player as you like. If you're not winning at least 50% of your duels, it ain't happening for you. So that's kind of why I don't think that Chem Campbell is a lazy player.